Marx's concept of revolutionary practice, that concept of, quote, the coincidence of the changing of circumstances and of human activity or self-change, close quote, is the red thread that runs throughout Marx's work. Marx was most consistent on this point when talking about the struggles of workers against capital and how this revolutionary practice transformed, quote, circumstances and men, close quote, expanding their capabilities and making them fit to create a new world. But this process of changing ourselves is not at all limited to the sphere of political and economic struggle. In the very act of producing, Marx indicated, quote, the producers change themselves in that they bring out new qualities in themselves, develop themselves in production, transform themselves, develop new powers and new ideas, new modes of intercourse, new needs, and new language, close quote, from the Grundrisse. And certainly the relations in which people produce affect the nature of the workers produced. After all, that was Marx's point about how capitalist productive relations, quote, distort the worker into a fragment of a man, close quote, and how those capitalist productive relations degrade him and, quote, alienate from him the intellectual potentialities of the labor process, end of quote. As I argue in my new book, The Socialist Alternative, it's essential to recognize that every human activity has as its result a joint product, a second product. Both the change in the object of labor and also the change in the laborer herself. And unfortunately, that second product is often forgotten. Marx's combination of human development and practice constitutes the key link that we need to grasp. Taken seriously, that key link has definite implications for relations within the workplace. Rather than capitalism's joint product, that fragmented, crippled human being whose enjoyment consists in possessing and consuming things, in other words, consumerism, it implies a person who is able to develop all her potential through her activity. Taken seriously, that key link has definite implications for the nature of the state. Rather than allowing us every few years to elect those who misrule us as our representatives to a state which stands over and above us, it implies what Marx called, in his work on the Paris Commune, the self-government of the producers. Quote, the reabsorption of the state power by society as its own living forces, close quote. Taken seriously, that key link has definite implications for the nature of the party. Rather than a body that sees itself as superior to social movements and whose members are meant to learn the merits of discipline in following the decisions made, in Rosa Luxemburg's words, by infallible central committees, it implies a party which learns from popular initiative and unleashes the creative energy of masses through their own practice. In short, taken seriously, that key link of human development and practice has obvious implications for building socialism. And this concept of the key link of human development and practice has been an important element in the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela since its beginning. With the recognition in the Bolivarian Constitution, which was adopted in 1999, that the goal of a human society must be that of ensuring overall human development, in the declaration of that Constitution that everyone has the right to the free development of his or her own personality, and in the focus on developing, quote, the creative potential of every human being and the full exercise of his or her personality in a democratic society, the theme of human development pervades the Bolivarian Constitution. And the other side of the key link can be seen in the Constitution's declaration that participation by people in, quote, forming, carrying out, and controlling the management of public affairs is the necessary way of achieving the involvement to ensure their complete development, both individual and collective, end of quote. In other words, the necessary way. There is no other way to develop people's capacities, individual and collective, than through practice and protagonism. And that same emphasis upon a democratic, participatory, and protagonistic society is present in the economic sphere with the Constitution's stress upon self-management, co-management, cooperatives in all forms, and upon active, conscious, and joint participation. Of course, we all know that there's an enormous gap between the real world and the words of the best Constitution. And the Bolivarian Constitution, which was only a snapshot at the beginning of a process, was hardly perfect. However, there has been the emergence in Venezuela in recent years of communal councils, communes, and workers' councils and workers' control in recovered factories and state sectors. And that is clearly an attempt to realize the vision of a society in which the protagonism, the action of subjects is necessary for their complete development, individual and collective. Now, creating the conditions in workplaces and communities by which people can develop their capacities is an essential aspect of the concept of socialism for the 21st century. But it is only one element. Because how can the workers' own need for development be realized if capital owns our social heritage? If capital owns the products of the social brain and the social hand? And how can we develop our potential, our own potential, if we look upon other producers as enemies or as our markets? In other words, if individual material self-interest is our motivation. Now, capitalism is an organic system. It's an organic system which has the tendency to produce and reproduce the conditions of its existence, including that working class which looks upon its requirements as self-evident natural laws. That is the strength of capital. And to counter that, and to satisfy the workers' own need for development, the socialist alternative also must be an organic system. A particular combination of production, distribution, and consumption, a system of reproduction. What President Chavez of Venezuela called in January 2007 as the elementary triangle of socialism, social property, social production, and satisfaction of social needs, is a step toward the conception of such a system. Consider the logic of this socialist combination, this conception of socialism for the 21st century that has surfaced in Venezuela. Unifying those three sides of the socialist triangle is the theme of human development. First, social ownership of the means of production is critical within this structure because it's the only way to ensure that our communal social productivity is directed to the free development of all, rather than used to satisfy the private goals of capitalists, groups of producers, or state bureaucrats. But this involves more than our current activity. Social ownership of our social heritage, the results of past labor, past social labor, is an assertion that all living human beings have the right to the full development of their potential. have the right to real wealth, which is the development of human capacity. It is the recognition that the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. Secondly, social production organized by workers. Social production organized by workers builds new relations among the producers, relations of cooperation and solidarity. It allows workers to end that crippling of body and mind and that loss of what Marx called every atom of freedom, both in bodily and intellectual activity, close quote, that comes from the separation of head and hand. Organization of production in all spheres by workers is a condition for the full development of the producers. For the development of their capabilities, it is a condition for the production of rich human beings. Thirdly, satisfaction of communal needs and purposes. Satisfaction of communal needs and purposes as the goal of productive activity means that instead of interacting as separate and indifferent individuals, we function as members of a community. Rather than looking upon our own capacity as our property, our own personal property, and as a means of getting as much as possible in an exchange, we start from the recognition of our common humanity, our existence within a community, and thus of the importance of the conditions in which everyone is able to develop her full potential. When our productive activity is oriented to the needs of others, it both builds solidarity and also builds among people and also produces socialist human beings. That's the joint product. These three sides of the socialist triangle form members of a whole. Parts of a structure in which all the elements coexist simultaneously and support one another, and they mutually interact. As Marx said, this is the case with every organic whole. Close quote. But the very existence, the very interdependence of the three sides suggests that realization of each element depends on the existence of the other two. Without production for social needs, no real social property. Without social property, no worker decision-making oriented towards society's needs. Without worker decision-making, no transformation of people and their needs. Paraphrasing Marx's description of capitalism as an organic system, in socialism as an organic system, every, quote, every economic relation presupposes every other in its socialist economic form, and everything posited is thus also a presupposition. This is the case with every organic system. Close quote. Of course, an organic system doesn't drop from the sky. A new system never produces its own premises at the outset. Rather, when a new system emerges, it necessarily inherits premises from the old system. Its premises and its presuppositions are historic premises, premises produced outside the system, and which thus do not arise out of its own foundations. In short, as Marx talked about it in the Critique of the Gotha program, every new system as it emerges is inevitably defective. It is, quote, in every respect, economically, morally, and intellectually still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society, close quote. Accordingly, the development of an organic system is a process of becoming. Marx's comment is, quote, its development to its totality consists precisely in subordinating all elements of society to itself, or in creating out of it the organs which it still lacks. This is historically how it becomes a totality, end of quote. And in the 1920s, the Soviet economist Yevgeny Prigozhin made this very point about how a new system develops. He said, quote, "Not a single economic formation can develop in a pure form on the basis merely of the immanent laws which are inherent to the particular formation. This would be in contradiction to the very idea of development. The development of any economic form means the ousting of other economic forms, the subordination of these forms to the new form, and their gradual elimination." Close quote. So, what is to be subordinated? If socialism is to develop into an organic system, social ownership of the means of production must supplant private ownership. Worker management must replace despotism in the workplace. And productive activity based upon solidarity and community must subordinate individual self-interest. And of course, the old state must be transcended, replaced by new organs which foster the simultaneous changing of circumstances and self-change. Those local councils, which Chavez in Venezuela has called the cells of a new socialist state. And also, not only the communal councils, but also workers' councils. Obviously, this can't happen overnight. It's also, though, something that cannot take place in stages. The idea of putting off some questions until a later beautiful stage is prepared is alien to the concept of an organic system. The continued presence of elements of capitalism does not simply mean that capitalism is still a little incomplete, because a few parts are missing. After all, what kinds of people are produced within the old relations? In fact, every moment that people act within old relations is a process of reproducing old ideas and old attitudes.